All right, you want to knock this thing out?
What are we saying again?
All right, so
I'm Paul Gilman.
and I'm Daniel Lance.
Right. And this is Potso 1.
Alrighty, this week we've got William Still on to talk growing up in small-town Georgia, specifically during the time of the Atlanta child murders, then later moving to D.C. to work various jobs on Capitol Hill, from a researcher at the NRSC to a press assistant on Phil Gramm's campaign. He also tells us what it was like going to law school at night with 2 kids and a full-time lobbying job, for which he was actually in D.C. on 9/11. All that and more in this great conversation. Here's William.
All right, welcome to episode, I think we're at 18 now?
17.
17, 18. Got my good buddy, William Still. I got to start over. I don't know why I'm nervous now. You'd think this is our first one.
It's amazing.
It's ridiculous.
You guys are good at this.
Yeah, we're
It's okay.
All right. Got my good buddy, William Still on tonight. Really excited to talk to him about his life story. William and I met in 2014. He's a solid dude, very, very funny in a very dry way, and has a pretty compelling story that I can't wait to dive deeper into. So welcome, William.
Welcome.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
All right, so William, I think you've essentially lived most of your life in the state of Georgia, right?
That's right. Born here, grew up here, mostly around in the Atlanta suburbs. Went to Washington, D.C. for a few years right after college, moved back to Atlanta when we started our family and have been here ever since. So it's been, call it 22 years since we moved back.
Yeah, so besides D.C., you've basically been metropolitan Atlanta. Athens, do you consider Athens metropolitan Atlanta?
Not really. I mean, it not really, but it's close enough.
Yeah, so born in Athens and then grew up, I think, in Dallas, right? Entirely in Dallas.
Yeah, Dallas, Georgia. Yep, grew up in Dallas, Georgia until high school. Moved to Walton County, little unincorporated area called Bold Springs. So that was a little area of very few people, but it's where my dad's parents lived, and so we moved there and right before high school, and graduated from Monroe Area Comprehensive High School, the home of the Purple Hurricanes, which is a very interesting mascot.
Say the name of the high school again.
Monroe Area Comprehensive High School.
What is that? So Monroe area, I understand, but why throw comprehensive in there?
I think it had to do with it offered things like shop and ag and kind of business classes and cosmetology. It really was a career track, college track. You know, it had multiple things going on there.
Also, it makes the acronym MACH.
That's right, matches.
Or like Mach speed, you know.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
And in fact, the Purple Hurricane should have played on that.
We should have. We could never quite decide if the mascot was a hurricane, which is a very hard thing to approximate in anthropomorphic form. So mostly it ended up being a tornado with arms. That was our mascot.
That was about 5'10".
That's right. Exactly. So yeah, I graduated from high school and was lucky enough to get into the University of Georgia and studied history. Bounced around like most college people do, is a couple different majors and dabbled in a couple different things. Was very interested in religion classes, but I was much too lazy to learn foreign languages, and so deciding to thinking about trying to learn ancient Greek or Latin that was beyond my interest or ability. So I said, well, you know what, I'll be a history major and I'll focus on American history because there's no foreign language there.
What was the plan with the history major after you graduated?
It was really unclear. In fact, graduation sort of snuck up on me. And I guess it was a couple of months before I was supposed to graduate. I sort of had a little freak out and said, what am I actually prepared to do? What do I want to do? Thought I would move out to Wyoming and just kind of work at Yellowstone for a little while to kind of get my bearings. But during that time, I was dating a woman who I ended up marrying, and so I stuck around and thought I was going to be a high school teacher. So I actually went back to UGA for another year, got a degree in social science education, thinking I would be a history teacher at the high school level. I actually did some student teaching, so I actually got into a classroom and had to try to manage 30 15-year-olds, which is a pretty amazing task, and very uh, not sure it's my personality to do that kind of thing, but it was interesting, that's for sure. And when my wife graduated, when I graduated, we got married, and then quickly moved to Washington D.C., where uh, she worked on Capitol Hill, and I ended up working on the Hill, but did a couple of little jobs here and there, more in the political side than policy.
Yeah, we're going to talk about some of that. Really looking forward to that conversation.
Yeah.
So history, it sounds like you just enjoyed learning about history and you would figure it out after you graduated kind of thing.
No, that's right. I mean, it's a pretty generic or wide open sort of background, right? You could go in and be a teacher at any level if that's what you wanted to do. I ended up going to law school. A lot of people kind of use that as a platform for law school, but yeah, there's no real career path for history major. Not a lot of money probably in being a quote unquote historian. So yeah, it was really more of it's something I'm interested in. It's something I'm good at, and we'll figure out the rest from there.
Right. And it's funny you mentioned Yellowstone. I love the national parks, especially the ones out west. I have not been to Yellowstone, but anybody that is a big fan of the national park system, Yellowstone is in their top 2 or 3.
Absolutely.
Why was it in your basically your top choice?
Well, that's interesting. But I went and worked there for a summer. A girl I was dating at the time, she found out that you could go and they have these little resort areas or dude ranches or whatever you want to call them, kind of around the park. And she wanted to do that, and I said, "It sounds like a great thing. Let's go out and do it." So we got in a Greyhound bus, and 3 days later, we were in what was called Pahaska Teepee, still called Pahaska Teepee. It was actually Buffalo Bill's hunting lodge outside of Cody, Wyoming. So he would come bring his friends into Cody. They would take the road up to the hunting lodge, and then, of course, there was no park there at the time, but they'd go into what was the park and go hunting, and then go back down to they'd spend months there. So it was a pretty interesting area. And the interesting thing about that was, even though we didn't have a car, there were people who worked there who had cars, and so we would be able to borrow their car and either go down to Cody or go through the park and go hiking, see all the geothermal features, just spend the day on your off days. I was the tour guide at Pahaska Teepee for the hunting lodge, so that was kind of an interesting thing. And you'd get all kinds of people coming through, all kinds of tourists, families, lots of bikers would come through. There's big rally in Sturgis, so you'd get a lot of the Harley bikers coming through, going to Sturgis at a certain time, and so it was very interesting people watching. You'd get we would always laugh. You'd get the tourists that would come in, and we had one who would ask at one point, what time does Yellowstone close? Well, it's a national park. It doesn't really close, right? They don't turn off Old Faithful and go, okay, it's 10 o'clock. You gotta leave. It's doing its thing, whatever. So, all kinds of people coming through there. But it's a beautiful place. You should definitely go.
Yeah. Not to bore you with this, but we had a choice between the Big Five in southern Utah and Yellowstone, and my wife told me we were going to see the Big Five in Utah.
Well, you were a smart man for doing that.
No challenges.
That's right.
We move forward. So tell us what it's like growing up in Dallas, Georgia.
Well, at the time when I was there, and it's grown up a lot in the last 40 plus years. I'll leave it at that, I guess. But when I was there in the early 70s, mid 70s, it was a very small town, had one traffic light in the whole county. It was a pretty great place to grow up, I think, as a kid. It seemed boring as you got older, but when you were a younger kid, you had a skating rink, and so You were there pretty much every weekend, someone's birthday party or just hanging out. And you had video games. That was the first kind of where video games were found. They were the big console games at the skating rink. So you'd go and skate a little bit and spend a few dollars getting your little suicide drink, and then go in and play in video games for a couple hours. So it was fun. And then lots of friends, and it was kind of wide open. The town was small. You could ride your bike to places and to your friend's house, or go spend the day walking through the woods, and sort of your parents didn't sort of worry over you. You'd come home when the sun started going down. It was pretty typical, I think, for people our age. I think for our kids, and I'm not sure that's the typical experience they're having anymore. But it's a pretty good place to grow up.
So a skating rink, is that one of those places where people just put on rollerblades and skate around in circles and listen to 80s music?
No, there were no rollerblades at the time. These were the traditional 4 on the floor quads. That there was no rollerblade.
Okay.
Yeah, that came later. That's the post 70s ironic skating, I think, is what you're thinking of.
Right.
Okay.
80s music, it would be a few years before that was written and performed.
Yeah, we just called it 80s music. We just called it music at the time, right? There was no 80s music. It was just music.
Yeah. Well, there are still some of those around. I know that there's one near Richmond, at least. That's just all I've heard about it.
Oh, it was. I mean, it was great. You'd have a friend, or you'd have your birthday party there, and everybody'd come skate, and you'd go into the little room and have your birthday party. It was all big fun.
Yeah. So you mentioned console video games. What was your favorite?
Well, on the upright, it probably was like a Defender. I think was probably my favorite. Pac-Man was obviously the classic. I remember Dragon's Lair when that came out. That was a very realistic for the time kind of cartoon game.
Right.
The technology was just kind of leaps and bounds from what had been out there ahead of time. So that was always worth the $1 that it cost. Everything else was a quarter, except that was I remember that being quite expensive. But
it probably was a 50-cent experience, but because they charged you $1, I guess it made you feel like it was a $1 experience.
That's right. That's probably right. So.
Hey, so Pac-Man and Miss Pac-Man were certainly two of my favorites, but I also enjoyed, and I can never get anybody to agree if I ask any two people. So actually Daniel doesn't understand this reference maybe. Galaga or Galaga?
Galaga.
I say Galaga. It's Galaga.
Galaga. Okay.
Yeah. You said Galaga?
I have weird friends that can't pronounce things.
Yeah, no, it's definitely Galaga.
Yeah, it's definitely Galaga. That was a great game too.
How about Galaga? I mean, because there's only one L there. But I digress. All right, so
it's like Galaxy, but instead of this XY at the end, it's the GA.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
There you go. Yeah. See?
Linguist to help us
That's
out.
right. That's right.
Boom. Yeah, I have a PhD.
Right. So, hey, William, how old were you when your family moved out of Dallas?
So it was 84, so I was 13. Yeah, that'd be about right. 34.
So you were in Dallas
84.
when the whole Wayne Williams thing was going on.
Oh yeah, but that was a big story. But it was definitely something that you were aware of when you were a kid growing up, right outside of Atlanta. Of course, when you're a kid, you don't have any sense of distance or kind of what's happening. You would just kind of get this sense from your parents that something was going on, and you'd sit down and watch TV, and they would come on every hour and say, it's 9:00. Do you know where your kids are? So you knew there was this thing going on. You didn't have a sense of, well, it's 25 miles from here, and the odds of me or my friends getting picked up by a guy and killed were pretty remote. But it was all over the news and everything, all that your parents talked about with their friends and everything. So it was a big deal. And it's sort of come back in the news. But did you guys have an awareness of that up in Virginia?
Yeah. What year was it? 79, 80?
Yeah, that's right. At 79 to I think the trial was 81, something like that.
Yeah, I remember I was 10, 11 years old, and I remember I understood that Georgia was not nearby, but it frankly made everybody who was a child or a parent nervous that their kid was going to be grabbed and killed. And so, yeah, it was definitely, from my perspective, it had to be national news. If we were hearing about it in Virginia, it was all over the country.
Yeah, I think it was kind of a time where, media was kind of getting more national. I think CNN was starting around that time, and you would get more national news coverage than, and so I think, there's probably stuff like that happened all the time before then, and but it wasn't a national story because there just wasn't a national kind of media approach, and now it's even more so. I mean, some kid gets picked up in the middle of Arizona, and it's going to lead the news on CNN or Fox or wherever for a day or two. But it really back then I think was kind of the first, at least from my perspective, my memory, kind of the first big national story like that.
Do you think that the media helped along the fear of strangers and the aversion to hitchhiking that has happened in the last 20 years?
Oh, I think so. I mean, I think it's all, it's not like bad people started in the 70s. They've always been around, and I think there's always been that element. But I think it's the awareness has grown through these stories and through the media coverage and probably over coverage. Me and several of my friends at work have listened to podcasts. I've gone back and read a couple of books and looked at news coverage, and so know a little more about that than probably definitely when I was a kid. And I think the news coverage was, I mean, it was front page every day for 3 years basically.
Yeah, my recollection is, because I think over 30 kids went missing and presumably dead. I think they found most of the bodies, but it became national news when it was in the high teens, low 20s, I think.
Yeah,
it just seemed insane because as a kid or a parent, and because to your point, it was the first national sort of story like that. People just we were dumbfounded that could happen. Yeah. But to your point, it's probably been happening since the beginning of time.
Right. Yeah, and there's been a couple of things like I said that's brought it back in the news. There was this show on Netflix called Mindhunter. Did you guys ever have you guys ever checked that out?
I've seen Mindhunter. I've not seen the Wayne Williams.
Yeah, it's season 2. It really is kind of the through story of season 2, and kind of frames it up. But the guy John Douglas, who's the FBI profiler, that's sort of who that's based on, he wrote about that case, and there was a podcast a couple years ago out of Atlanta that covered it. And so yeah, probably a little bit of an unhealthy interest in it, at least from my wife's perspective. We've actually gone and driven by the bridge where he was accused of throwing off one of the bodies, where he was eventually kind of picked up and first identified as a suspect. We've gone by his house. My wife, it's not in a great part of town, and so I always tell my wife after the fact when I get home that we went on the Wayne Williams tour.
Wow, yeah, you really are interested in it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it definitely was a big part of growing up, in this area, because it was all over. I mean, and it was something that you were aware of.
And he was emphatically linked to over 30 murders, right?
Yeah, they convicted him of 2 murders, and it's pretty controversial because the murders that he was convicted of were basically young adults, and then they were the only 2 young adults that were linked to the whole group, but not convicted for any of the kids. But there was a lot of circumstantial evidence, like hair fibers. There was a green carpet that I think they said that had been sold only installed in only like 400 houses or something, and his house had it. So I mean, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence to link him to some of the other kids, but he was never convicted. And it's been I mean, you can imagine if you're one of the parents of the kids and not having that closure of someone saying definitely he did it or definitely he didn't do it. So it's been controversial. Our the mayor of Atlanta has asked, and I think to reopen some of the DNA. There's been some advances in DNA testing, kind of genealogical DNA testing, where they can take strands and find relatives. Maybe they don't have, Paul's DNA, but maybe they have your uncle's, and so they can start matching and then closing in on suspects through the family tree. And so there's new techniques like that they're trying to apply to this case, because there wasn't really DNA evidence that they could test at the time to link Williams to the murders.
Yeah, and the parents of those kids, they're probably in their 60s and 70s now, so I'm sure they would still welcome closure if it could come to them.
Yeah, absolutely. There'll be news stories on the local television stations, every couple of months where they're looking to do a memorial, and they'll interview some of the parents and stuff. So yeah, there's still parents out there that live through that.
Yeah, awful story, but very interesting as well.
Yeah,
I don't think you're weird for going on the Wayne Williams tour.
Well, good. Well, maybe when we get it set up, you could be our first customer.
Yeah, perfect.
I think that there's a universal appeal or fascination. It's on a human level for murder and kidnapping and these horrible things that regular people in their right mind wouldn't do. There's such a fascination for trying to figure out people that do that. Like if I had a nickel for every podcast out there that's just devoted to murder and crime and unsolved murders, all that stuff, I'd be set for life.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely.
Rock on. So, Mr. William, you are a married man.
I am. Yes, 26th year here.
26 years. Wow, that is how old I am.
Well, there you go.
How about that?
Thank you for that.
So, tell us about. Let's rewind 26 years. How did you meet your wife?
So I met her at a party. I was working at Pizza Hut in Athens and delivering pizzas, and met a girl there, and thought she was pretty good looking, pretty interesting. And so I asked her out one day, and she said, well, I actually have a boyfriend, but I think you guys would get along great. So why don't you come over and let's hang out? So I don't know why, but I guess I did. And so went over there and hung out with her and her boyfriend a couple times. And one night they were having a party, and I went over, and there was this girl there down from Gettysburg College, and I introduced myself, and we talked a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit. And she went back to college and went back to Gettysburg, and I kept hanging out with my friends. And finally, Keith, that's her name, Keith. She moved back to go to University of Georgia, and we started hanging out, and the rest is history, basically.
So just to be clear, this wasn't the girl that you had the crush on at first. This was her friend
not
that you
the
met
first,
at the party.
Not the first girl. That's right. The second girl. Thank you.
Okay, yeah.
Keith is from Georgia, but she went to school in Gettysburg?
Yeah, she did.
That's a long haul to a very small place.
It is. She wanted to go to Georgia. Her parents are tech people, and Georgia, Georgia Tech people don't like Georgia people. Georgia people feel sorry for Georgia Tech people, so there's not the animosity going the other way. But Tech people really have a thing about Georgia, and so they basically told her you can go wherever you want except Georgia. And so she went to Gettysburg for a couple years. She played tennis up there for the school, and then, but really wasn't. It is a very small place. It's sort of like your fifth through eighth year of high school in some ways, I think, because it just is kind of small. So she wanted to get back to Georgia and convinced her parents to let her move down. And
wow.
I think 3 grandchildren later, they're happy for that.
Yeah, it paid off.
That's right.
Yeah, no, I remember visiting Gettysburg as a kid, and I'll never forget the impression just it had on my mind, like the combination of these wide open fields that were prohibited from being developed upon, with the fact that there was atrocious death and destruction on them. Like, it was all very impactful, and it's even when I still have that impression of it, even from being a kid. I think it would be so cool to go to school there.
Well, she talked about how they would go study in the battlefield. They would be sitting there in Devil's Den reading their English homework or whatever, and tourists would come by and listening to their their headsets about, in this place, so many thousand people were slaughtered. So it is kind of a surreal experience, I think.
Yeah.
And then there's the ghost stories, then there's the story of the person who gets, the only civilian to die, and of course the house is haunted because they're the only civilian who dies. So there's all kinds of that overlay as well.
Oh, cool.
That the students learn. So yeah, I think it would be an interesting place to go to school, but you definitely have to have the mindset for it, because it is small, and it is in a lot of ways, I think, pretty cliquish.
Oh, okay. And I'm going to get caught for my geography here, but it's in Pennsylvania or Virginia?
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania, okay.
Just over.
First guess.
We'll remind some, and our new listeners need to understand that Daniel spent most of his life overseas. So U.S. geography can be a challenge from time to time.
That's true. And U.S. politicians, especially those, from the 90s into the 2000s.
There you go.
That
sounds like a transition.
Yeah, because I hear that your wife worked for Bill Frist, who I just looked up on Wikipedia about 30 minutes ago, and he struck me as a pretty interesting character. So tell us about your wife working on that campaign.
So she was a political science major at University of Georgia, and when she graduated, she started working at the Georgia Public Policy Foundation here in Atlanta. The person who brought her on to that organization was the campaign manager for then it was Dr. Frist. Now it's former Senator Frist. But so he brought Keith up to organize the press office, start kind of setting up the campaign organization. So she did some of that work, and then as the campaign went on, continued going until pretty much from October until the election. She lived in Nashville, and I was living in Lawrenceville here in Atlanta, and would go up there on the weekends while she was doing the campaign work. And it was a very interesting time. It was the '94 election, which you don't remember because I don't even know that you were born then, if I do the quick math. But it was what's called the Republican Revolution, where Republicans took over the House for the first time in probably, I think, 40 or 50 years. And just so it was a pretty exciting time, especially for people of my political persuasion. And Keith was able to be on the campaign, and we were actually she was over at the campaign in the campaign headquarters and the party that night on election night, and I was back at the headquarters watching television. And when I saw that the races were starting to come in, I walked over to the hotel where the party was going on, and met up with Keith. And about that time, it became clear that they were about to call their election, the Senator Frist, the Frist election. So we went up to the hotel room where the senator and his family and some of the campaign aides were, and we're talking. And about that time, the phone rang, and it was the concession from his opponent, Senator Sasser. So we were in the room when he received the concession. So that was a pretty interesting experience. And then immediately Keith and her colleagues got to work on writing the victory speech, and I went back to watching television. So it was kind of
Keith was involved with writing speeches?
Oh yeah, she worked in the press office, and so she wrote the press releases and was part of writing speeches for him as well.
Yeah, being in the hotel room has to be like a once in a lifetime kind of experience. The level of excitement and joy after spending so much time campaigning. It's not just the politician campaigning; it's his entire team. That had to be a really cool experience. And I think Sasser, I think you were telling me he was a 3-term senator, right?
Yeah, he had been in for 18 years. In fact, that was one of the slogans that they came up with, was 18 years is long enough. And so that was I guess Tennesseans, or at least some of them, enough of them agreed that 18 years was enough. So yeah, he was pretty entrenched.
I'm shocked.
It's probably enough for any senator.
It should be more than enough in my view. Yeah, but yeah. No, I mean, for me, definitely it's a once in a lifetime experience, and something, I don't think about that often, but when I do think about politics and kind of my life at that time, I mean, it was definitely a unique thing to experience.
For someone that doesn't know Bill Frist, What was he like?
I mean, he's a great guy. He's a heart transplant surgeon. That was his claim to fame. His family, I think, founded HCA Healthcare in Tennessee, and so a lot of doctors in his family. And um, I think it was the first sort of idea of Hillary Care that sort of energized him to, if I remember correctly, to when Clinton was first elected, that sort of energized him to get active. And so he really cared about the policy issues and was a um, quick learner about policy issues. And in fact, he was successful enough where he eventually became majority leader for a time. Long after we had left Washington, long after Keith was no longer on the staff, but he was a great guy, and I think a great senator for Tennessee for sure.
And I don't know if this is a common thing at all for senators, but I read that he said that he would step down after 2 terms. He said, "That's it. I'm going to do 2 terms and leave."
And did.
And then he actually did.
He actually did, and like I said, he was the majority leader of the Senate, and still stepped down. And so I think that says a lot about his integrity. It's easy to make those promises when you're running, and you maybe there's a chance you're not going to win, but to actually live through those promises and keep them, I think that speaks to your character.
Oh, absolutely. And like, it's not a promise of doing something next week. It's a promise of doing something in 12 years. And a lot of things can change in 12 years, and he's still stuck to his word. So I think that's
absolutely
pretty cool. Yeah.
Well, another story is he was famous for there was a guy coming to his office to he was a constituent, and he was wanting to lobby on some issue or petition on some issue or whatever, and collapsed, had a heart attack in the elevator, and someone came running in the Senate office, and the senator came out and basically rescued him, saved his life.
Is there a doctor in the Senate?
Yeah, literally that scenario. Yes.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
That is very cool.
Doesn't he an intersection with Petraeus? Or is that, am I thinking of somebody else?
That I don't know. It's possible, but I don't know that. I mean, we were there until 97, end of 97. So I think Keith was his press secretary from maybe 96 and 97 before we moved back to Atlanta. So yeah, right after the election, after the senator won, Keith got the call that he wanted her to come up and be part of his press office in D.C. And we were newly married, and as much of my career sacrifice for her was I stopped working at the Subway while I was looking for a teaching job and decided to move to D.C.
You're a good man.
And yeah, I know. I give so much. She doesn't remember that. I don't think very much, but no, I gave up my sandwich artistry, and we moved to DC. And we had made some friends on the campaign, and we were young, 25, whatever, and very 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 young, needless to say, and no money to fly up for the weekend to look for housing. So we basically relied on our friends. We would call them and say, "Hey, we're looking for a place to live. What areas should we look in?" And really relied on their advice. And so we signed a lease, sight unseen, on a place. And I remember the landlord, we were talking to him, and he was like, "Are you sure you don't want to come up and take a look at it and make sure it's okay?" And we said, frankly, we don't have time, and we can't really afford to take a separate trip. So I'm sure it's fine. And we both kind of had this unspoken nervousness as we crossed the Beltway, and some of the areas, and started it was a lot different from our experience living in the suburbs of Atlanta. So there was a little bit of unspoken hesitation of, oh my gosh, is this place going to be okay? Did we make the right decision? What's going to happen? But it was a beautiful place. It was in a place called Park Fairfax, right outside of DC, near the Pentagon. It was actually kind of one of the first big developments when they started in the war, building up the Pentagon and everything. And so it was a great place to live, and just still in the South in Virginia, but close enough that you could drive in the morning and not have too much traffic.
That's great that it worked out.
Yeah, it was funny. We talked about it afterward. We didn't say anything in the car, but later that week, we both kind of admitted that we had a little bit of nervousness as we first pulled up, to the area.
Yeah,
Right.
And
as
yeah,
a Virginian, William, I will tell you that that part of the state of Virginia is not part of the South in 2020.
no, I know it wasn't really in 1994 either, but
Yeah.
take
Part of
what
the
you can get.
South, meaning like the South, like the conservative South.
Yeah, I think culturally, I think it's DC is a big blend. I mean, obviously of all kinds of people, and so you've got people from all over living in Alexandria and Arlington. So it's
Hmm.
culturally it yes it's more liberal than the conservative South, what people think of as a conservative South. But in some ways it's I can't quite remember the saying. Was it Kennedy that said DC has the charm of a northern city and the weather of a southern city? I think that's how he described it. So something like that.
Was he being ironic?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sure he was.
Yes.
I don't really associate northern cities with being charming. I'll probably get in trouble for saying that, but
You just alienated at least half our listeners.
yeah, I'm sorry. To my New England family, if you ever listen to this, I am sorry. Rode
Oh,
on
I'm
the
sorry. I
coattails.
think I just looked at what the first quote that comes up on the internet, so we know it's accurate. Washington is a city of southern efficiency and northern charm. Yeah, so that was the saying.
Oh,
So
that's hilarious.
yeah,
He was certainly
yes,
ironic or sarcastic. Yeah.
And
that's right.
that was Kennedy. Which Kennedy?
John F.
The John. All right.
Yeah.
Um. So
So
you
yeah,
rode,
I wrote her coattails. That's exactly right. So
but you didn't. You weren't not pulling your weight at all because you did get a job once you were in DC, right?
yeah, that's right. I started working at the National Republican Senatorial Committee. I was doing opposition research, what we called the track, and it was a room of maybe 10 by 20, where they would cram 20 of us. We were lined around the perimeter of the walls with our back to the middle, and we sat there all day just coding in news articles, press releases, all kinds of information that we could get a hold of, and on the Democrat opponents and on the Republican candidates as well, and just doing opposition research, coding them in by keyword, by topic, by issue, uh, how they voted, what they said to their constituents versus how they voted in DC, so that during when the campaign really got underway, you had an opposition research book already built on that candidate that the Republican could use. And it was interesting because, like I said, it was at 8 hours in the track, and lots of young conservatives, very passionate, very committed people, to spend those hours and that kind of work, and not very much money. Um, and so lots of good philosophical debates among passionate people who knew very little but what they really firmly believed in.
So like when I see commercials that say this senator voted 11 times to raise taxes on the middle class, and these obscure statistics that come out, like, is that part of what the research that you produced at the NRSC
Yeah,
was used for?
absolutely. Absolutely, that's exactly right. You would see, in what you're describing, you'd see, reference to the roll call votes, and then you'd see maybe a reference to the local newspaper where they would have pull a quote from. That's all being pulled by 24-year-olds who are sitting in a windowless room, coding in votes and quotes into a tracking system.
Driven by their zeal for ideology and conservative values.
Yeah, well, that's right. On obviously on my side, and of course the Democrat side has their own committee doing the exact same thing.
Oh, I'm sure.
I think our most famous alumni, actually, from when I was there at the track, is a guy named Sean Spicer, who became the press
No
secretary
way.
for the president. Yeah, for a short time. So yeah,
How about that?
Sean was on the track while I was there. So it's kind of interesting to turn on television and go, hey, that's a guy that I went to the Capitals game with, or whatever. So
Well, hey, William, you can maybe help us get him on the podcast, man.
I'll get right on it. I'll see what I can do.
That's very cool. It kind of, as somebody that's working in the technology world right now, I'm curious as to how much of that is automated these days, but how much of the scraping the internet for articles and identifying, labeling, tagging, and inputting them into some kind of central database like that there's like machine learning and natural language processing technologies that's growing in ability to be able to read an article and deduce whether it has positive or negative connotation about the subject matter, and then automatically label it and tag it. I'm wondering if that level of technology has reached the NRSC or the DRSC or no, the NDSC, if that exists.
Yeah, I don't know. It's been that's a long time ago, so I don't know, but I'm sure they're working on it. The question is it cheaper for the machine, or is it cheaper to have 25 guys who are willing to sit around and make minimum wage doing this for the because it obviously part of the trade-off is you're networking, you're going to events, you're getting invited to briefings, and so you're able to take that position hopefully and move up, and in Sean's case, become the press secretary for the president. In my case, I'm a regulatory compliance attorney in Atlanta, Georgia. So I'm not sure how that path went, but yeah, so that's part of it, and I there's that hope of a job and of a career path coming out of it, but I'm sure there is, it's much more automated, I'm sure, than it was back then. Back then I would spend days in the Library of Congress in the news periodicals room, pulling newspapers, going to get the Des Moines Register to see how Senator Harkin voted on a certain topic, or how he framed it to his constituents, and then go back and take that information and enter it into the computer system.
Wow. I think, that point about the human element and the networking element that's a very strong case. Especially, it sounds like a really cool environment, just being around a bunch of 20-somethings that are all just really passionate about what they're doing, and they're not making any money, and they're all in the same boat. I think that's that sounds like a really fun environment to be in.
Yeah, it was fun. It was a blast, actually, yeah, and then in my case, it led to the next step in what I did in DC, which was I was the director of correspondence and a press assistant with the Phil Gramm campaign for president in 1996. So that was a kind of another, at least for me, Paul, a once in a lifetime event to be involved in. I can't quite remember when I joined. It was I want to say mid '95. I don't know that I was there a whole year, but work there, and again with lots of young, talented people who were cared passionately about the issues that the senator cared about, and we're there to try to change the world. And there really is, to your point, Paul, it's a campaign isn't, I mean, it's not just about the candidate when you're working there. I mean, it's about you. It's not just your job. It's what you believe in. It's what your passions are for, and what drives you forward. And so in my case, in that case, I got to see the phone call from the other side, I guess, if you will, because that campaign didn't quite go as well as the Frist campaign. But we lost in Iowa. It was a pretty embarrassing loss. Senator Graham had a lot of money early in the campaign, and so had this kind of aura of invincibility or inevitability. And so when he lost in Iowa, I was actually scheduled to go. It was Valentine's Day. I was scheduled to go to New Hampshire. I think the next day, I had a bag packed, ready to go. My wife had put a Valentine's card in it because I wasn't going to be there for Valentine's. But as I was, getting packed and getting ready to go, they told us to come up to Capitol Hill, that the senator had an announcement to make. They filed all of his staff into a conference room and our committee room, and announced he came up and thanked us all for our help, and announced he was suspending his campaign. And it was pretty, pretty devastating for all of us in the room and for him. I mean, it's something he had been doing, and obviously it's a personal rejection, no matter how you put it. When the electorate says no, no, thank you, and so we listened to him. We started filing out. I remember that there was people crying, and as you could expect, and there were news media cameras out outside the door trying to get pictures of I guess staffers crying, and I can remember kind of jostling against the camera trying to block the view and stuff like that. So it was kind of a sad day and a sad outcome. But I mean, again, lots of great people, lots of great energy, fun experiences. I remember there was a blizzard in DC one morning, and my job was to go in and do the early morning press clippings. So we'd get news services to come in. I would clip out the news of the from overnight, so that the campaign staff could give the senator briefings on here are the topics that you should expect to hear about today. Here's kind of how the story played out overnight. And I was the only one in the office because of the blizzard and doing my clippings, and the phone rang and I answered it, and it was the senator. He was driving to some event out in Iowa, and asked me what was going on, what was in the news. And so I got to speak to him for a few minutes. And when you're 25 years old, that's pretty damn heady stuff. And you feel like you're in you're in the game then. And then they hung up and went on his way, and I got about the rest of my day. So
So did you personally look up to figures like Phil Gramm or Bill Frist?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I admired them that I worked for. I mean, I think it's not necessary for you to admire the person you work for. I mean, but I think it helps, and especially in politics, because back then, I don't know what it is now. Back then, the pay was fairly low, and very long hours, and so you had to have this is a cliche, but you had to have passion. You had to be driven by a belief in something, whether it was this person's fulfilling this ideology that I believe in, or I admire this person. But I was lucky to work for Senator Gramm, who I admire greatly. I worked for Senator Coverdell, who was the senator for Georgia for a number of years before he passed away, who I admired greatly. So, and we talked about Senator Frist. Even though I didn't work for him, he was a great guy for my wife to work for, and just a great guy in general. And I think, to use the cliche, a great American. And so we were lucky to be able to work for good people that you could be proud of to tell your parents you were working for. You hear stories about certain, I won't use names, but for example, a certain former presidential candidate who, may been accused of degrading staff, throwing binders at staff, things like that. So you'd hear nightmare stories like that from time to time. But I think that's I think the exception. I think the people, when you're working for someone in that environment, there's a little bit of a luxury to choose, I think, and at least maybe not your first job, but you position yourself into a job where you can choose to be with the person that you admire.
Right.
Were you surprised that Gramm dropped his candidacy so early on? Because how many candidates were there? A handful, and he came in last, kind of thing, and that's why he dropped out?
Yeah, he came in fifth, I think, in Iowa, fourth or fifth. He was expected to come in much better. There had been a straw vote in Louisiana, and he had lost that. There was my recollection, this is a long time ago, there was some controversy there. Some of the Buchanan people were sort of accused of stirring up some racial issues with Senator Gramm. His wife is Asian, and so there was a little bit of some whispering campaign that maybe there was some of that had been brought up. So he lost in Louisiana, and then that was, I think, sort of a wake-up call. And then when he came in fifth in Iowa, I think it just became clear that it was not his year.
Yeah, you got to talk to Gramm, senator, at the age of 25. I'm 51. I've never talked to a U.S. senator. It's pretty cool.
Well, I'm sure they'd take if once the COVID gets behind us, you can go and give them money. I'm sure they'll talk to you then.
We're gonna get him on the
Be happy
podcast.
to. Yeah.
I would love that. I did actually talk to a senator from Illinois once because I was making phone calls for a presidential campaign back in the fall, actually, and we were phone banking for Andrew Yang. I don't know if you've heard of him.
I've heard of him.
And we were phone banking Illinois. We were just calling people and making sure that the people were, number one, still alive, had the name that was on record, and trying to figure out who they supported. And this old guy picks up the phone and he starts talking about like how Illinois needs better education reform, or the student debt crisis is out of hand. And he started talking about legislation that he had written back in the 70s or 80s. And he tells me his name, and I look him up, and sure enough, on Wikipedia, he's a former Illinois state senator. I was like, wow, that's so cool. Yeah, and then I actually went, my parents live in New Hampshire, which, as you know, gets spoiled by all the presidential candidates. So I got to go up and meet Andrew Yang, who I admire personally.
Oh, nice.
So
Yeah.
that was really cool. But yeah, so let's see. There was one more thing I wanted to say before moving on to law school. There's a perception, I think, that's pretty popular that politicians are like power hungry generally by default, and that the people that should be politicians and should be serving in public office are typically the ones that don't want to. How do you feel about that perception? I mean, do you think that it exists, and do you think that it applied to the people whose campaigns you worked with? Like, did you think that there was an undercurrent of just wanting power and wanting influence, or were these people genuinely trying to make the world a better place?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, maybe I'm naive. Maybe I have to believe this, but I think for the most part, I mean, you got to remember there's 100 senators, and so I'm sure out of every 100, there's going to be a couple that are in line with what you're describing, the power hungry. But I think it's a grind. I mean, to fundraise and to travel and be away from your family, to uh, just the sacrifices that these people make, and especially in the House of Representatives, uh, you're up for reelection every 2 years, so it's just the grind is even harder. I think there has to be a certain level of wanting to make a difference. I mean, I think most of the senators, most of the representatives that come in are truly interested in making a difference, making from a policy perspective. Maybe over time, when you live in a bubble and you don't drive your own car for 6 years or 20 years, maybe that corrupts you over time. But I do think, and again, maybe I'm naive. I probably am. Not sure that that's necessarily a bad thing, but I like to think that they get into politics for the right reasons. Now, they may stay in for the wrong reasons, but I think they at least start out for the right reasons.
Yeah, going back to Frist saying he was going to just do 12 years and then actually doing that. And I imagine to your point, it becomes a really attractive place to stay once you've been a bit corrupted by the power there.
Oh yeah, I mean, especially if you're the Senate Majority Leader, you've got an office in the Capitol building that uh, historical figures that everyone would recognize their names have been in those offices, and have had that position, and you're you're one of the four people in line for the president, or five people in line to be president. I mean, that you don't drive your own car, you walk through security without being stopped. I mean, it's just the trappings of that. I'm sure plus there's a lot of pressure for you to stay in, because who knows what's going to happen to the next person, and there's a lot of prestige that Tennessee probably lost when the majority leader of the Senate was no longer a Tennessee senator, right? And so there's that home state pressure, and so yeah, I'm sure it was a very hard decision.
But he clearly has some serious fortitude to stick with what he originally committed to.
Yep.
William, you get to answer a question that we've asked most of our guests. would you rather, at the age of 25, you're not married, in this hypothetical, you don't have any kids, you have nothing tying you down, you can literally go do anything you want, but you've narrowed it down to two choices. You can either join the U.S. military, spend 4 years in the military, and who knows where you end up going over those 4 years.
Do I have a particular branch?
You can go into any branch
Okay.
if they'll take you. Not all branches take everybody, but
That's fair.
I'm sure in your case you would be taken by all of them. Or you can every week for 6 months put together a stand-up comedy routine and deliver it in front of strangers. Every week for 6 months. What do you choose, and why?
That's a good question. I would like to choose the military because I think it would have been good for me at 25 and now. I don't think I would have made it in the military, so I think I would choose the comedy route.
Really? So it's more about going away from one, and that leads you with the only other option we've given you.
Yeah, that's right. I think they're both tough choices in much different ways, and I don't mean that any disrespect in that, but yeah, I don't think I would be cut out for military life. I have too much of a sarcastic, caustic, anti authority streak. I just don't think I would have made it very far. And so I think that only ends in tears, and the tears from sort of washing out of the military, I think would have much long lasting effects on my career and my life than being a failed stand-up comedian.
Yeah, I think you would probably avoid the brig, but you'd be breaking a lot of rocks, I imagine.
That's fair.
It sounds like you think that it would be a source of trauma rather than a strengthening process, the military.
No, I started out by saying I would wish that I could choose the military because I think it would have been good for me and would be good for me. I just don't think I would have learned fast enough to survive. And my mouth the way it's all of my life, and much less pressure filled situations would get me in trouble.
I have seen that in action.
It just would, Paul. You know that. It just would. So
if you were in the military together, I would love to stand behind you and just watch you let it fly.
and then watch me get smacked in the face. Yes.
Right. Do you think so you've chosen the comedy route in this fictitious?
Yes.
Do you think you'd be a pretty good comedian by the end of the 6 months?
I think it would be something that would be fun, and so I don't know. This sounds egoistic, but I think I could be successful in some sort of whatever that measure is, whether it's you're surviving or you're getting satisfaction out of the job. I think I could see that. I think it would be a rewarding career path from that perspective, because I do like to make people laugh. I do like to tell funny stories and get that reaction from people. And I think it's just got to be satisfying when you have a room reacting to what you're saying, and hopefully in a positive way, especially in a positive way. I just think that would be a rush. I think it would be fun to do.
Yeah, it's fun to get a small room of friends or coworkers to laugh, but it's another thing to get 50 strangers, 100 strangers to laugh. I mean, what a rush! You're right.
Yeah, and I mean it takes such a skill to, it's one thing to react to people and to make little quips and get laughs like that, that's just cheap. But to actually be the one where you're having to tell the story in a way that you're bringing the audience along, I mean, that's a skill that
Yeah.
it's easy to play off of someone. It's easier to play off of someone, but to be that center of attention and to get people where you want them to be, so at the end they're going, "Oh, I didn't see that coming," and they just start laughing. I think that takes a skill, obviously.
Yeah, I think you'd be pretty good at it, actually.
Well, maybe I'll start. It's never too late.
Yeah,
We're
I'd like my military career. I don't think my weight and age would be a drawback for the comedy career.
gonna.
that's right.
Well, we're gonna start a comedy club in Paul's basement. So
I heard it's palatial. I think was that the word
Oh
Gene used?
God.
the palatial estate. It was funny. I think Gene came into the podcast ready and armed with that phrase.
Well, he used it a couple of times, so I'm pretty sure it was.
Yeah, he kind of fell in love with the whole notion of that. Yeah.
Let's talk about law school, which you decided to go to. I don't know why. Why did you decide to go to law school?
Boredom, I guess, and not knowing what else to do, right? So, no, it was always one of those things that I thought I might be good at. When you're a sarcastic, argumentative child, everyone tells you, you should be a lawyer, and so I think there's a little bit of that gets internalized when you hear it so much. The real story is basically we moved back to Atlanta. When our first daughter was born. She was born in D.C. and a few weeks later we moved back to Atlanta. And I was interviewing at a company. I was going to be the first lobbyist that they ever had. I was supposed to set up the lobbying shop for that company. The person I was interviewing with was trying to tell me all the great things about the company, and one of the benefits that they had was they would pay for me to go back to school. And so, wanting to be a conscientious, ingratiating person, I said, "Oh, I've always thought about going back to law school. That sounds like a great benefit. Thank you, sir. I look forward to joining the company." And I got the job, and then it became every couple of months I'd get a question of, "Well, when are you going to go back to law school?" And so
You said that during the interview.
yeah, exactly, because you say what you say what you think they want to hear.
Right.
Like any smart person trying to trick someone into giving them a job.
So they started giving you some crap about it, or just
just checking in. When are you going to go to law school? I thought that was something you wanted to do, and I said, Michael, that was my boss's name. I said, fine, Michael, I'll take the LSAT, which is the entrance exam. If I get in, I'll go. If not, then you'll get off my back about it, and I'll move on with my life. And I was fortunate enough to score well enough to go to Georgia State's night program, which I went to for 4 years. While working a full-time job in Alpharetta, north of Atlanta, I'd get in my car at 5 o'clock every afternoon and drive a full hour, 20 miles, a full hour, and walk into class right as it was starting, and basically did that for 4 years.
And
that's a brutal drive with no traffic. Alpharetta is a haul. I can't imagine trying to get there around dinner time.
Yeah, I mean it's 20 miles, but it was an hour to hour plus. I say every day. I mean it was 3 or 4 times a week, just depending on the semester.
And you had the full-time job, and you had a toddler, right? Because you just had your daughter.
Correct. Yes, I obviously couldn't have done it without my wife allowing me to, because we had in 2001 we had a 4-year-old and then a child who was just born. So yep, literally in diapers, just born. So Keith was very supportive and allowed me the opportunity to do that. So I always said I had the easy part of that gig.
That's the easy part. Oof, man. Both, yeah. Because doing a full-time job, taking up all your energy, and then getting in the car and going to night school, that's a lot. But I've never had kids, so I obviously can't speak to what that would be like. So
babies are 24/7.
Yeah, there's no get. At least in the hour I was in the car, there was no. I could turn off the noise and just veg out. There's no turning off the noise with a 4-year-old and a less than 1-year-old.
Was Keith working during this time as well?
She was doing some part-time work, but mostly just raising the kids and keeping sane.
Nice.
So I was in law school from 2001 to 2005, and still doing a full-time job. So I was would travel on my lobbying trips every once in a while. So I would always try to schedule those so I'd go up on an off day where I didn't have school that night. But I was still learning. School had just started, so I was still learning how to balance all that. Um, I went up to Washington on September 10th, 2001, and was supposed to have some meetings on September 11th up on the Hill. Was going to come home that evening and had law school, the rest of that week. But of course, we all know what happened that Tuesday morning on September 11th. I was actually in the offices with our lobbyist, good friend of mine, and of course, like everybody else in America, everybody thought, oh, this was a horrible accident. It's unclear what's happened, but it's certainly tragic. But it's a one-time thing, and we're basically going to continue with our day. In fact, I remember asking Bob. I said, do you think, as our lobbyist, I said, do you think we're going to need to cancel our meetings? This was after the first plane, of course, not before the second plane. And he said, "Oh no, we're not meeting with anyone from New York. I'm sure they're going to be, very busy with trying to figure out, what happened with this terrible plane accident, and they have constituent issues, but we should be fine." And then, of course, the second plane hit. It was clear what was going on, or at least more clear what was going on, and that we were going to Capitol Hill. In fact, we sat on basically on M Street and watched the news just like the rest of the world. I remember watching the traffic, kind of just one giant line of traffic trying to get out of the city. I'd given up my hotel room that morning because, of course, I was leaving that day, and so didn't have a hotel room. All the rooms were full because everyone was getting stuck in the city like me. I remember going to the rent-a-car company to see if I could rent a car. They wanted to charge a couple $1,000s for a one-way rental, so that didn't seem like an option. So fortunately, I was able to spend the night there, a couple of nights while travel got sorted out. I remember having to email my professors to say, "Hey, I'm not gonna be there on Wednesday, and I'm not sure when I'll be there if I'll be there on Thursday." And I'm here in DC, and so that was kind of obviously an interesting time, and an interesting wrinkle in the settling into law school, and meeting the professors a week before, and then having that working through that. So
Wow.
Yeah, that was the very beginning of your law school, right? It was the first semester.
Yeah, it was first semester. Yeah, and
Well, so when the plane hit the Pentagon, I imagine you learned about it just like everybody else did that wasn't near the site. You learned about it on TV probably, but you weren't that far from that third plane hitting the Pentagon, being on M Street, right?
No, we were. Yeah, I mean, we were. I think it's probably a couple of miles, but so we couldn't see anything. But the next morning, when I came into DC with my friend, we drove by the Pentagon, and you could obviously see the smoke. I mean, it was still clearly an active site. But yeah, I mean it. And then you're worried about. I remember Bob's house was next to CIA headquarters, and so when we finally got out to his house that evening, I mean, we didn't even try to leave before I think it was like 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, just because the whole area was jammed with traffic. Finally got home. His wife was talking about all the helicopters going in and out of Langley, and I remember having a thought at one point when the president wasn't returning to DC. I just remember thinking, they know something. There's a dirty bomb or something in the city, and that's why they're not bringing the president back. And I just remember going, holy cow, what other shoe's about to drop here? And then of course he finally came back and gave his speech, from the White House. But yeah, it was a weird day, and for a lot of people. I remember calling Keith, and she was at home, and at that point we just had Anne, who was probably, well, she was 4, or not quite 4, and they were watching TV, and of course Keith is worried about me being in DC, and she's just crying, and of course Anne, my oldest daughter, is crying because her mother's crying. And I said, just turn off the television. There's nothing, I'm fine. There's nothing you're going to do about it. Nothing you're going to learn on the news about me. So why don't you just turn off the TV, go to your play group for Anne and her friends, and just continue on with what your plans were. it's hard. You're separated like that.
Yeah, even though you were safe and your wife and daughters were safe, it's still disconcerting to say the least.
I was even like, I think 7 or 8 years old, and it felt like the whole world was still for a day. You couldn't just not think about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, everybody's got their 9/11 story, obviously, and they're pretty much all the same. I mean, unless you're immediately impacted by that. But again, just sort of by happenstance, being in DC on that day, just sort of for me, it was made it that much more unusual.
Yeah, totally.
Cool. So, William, you're the proud father of 3 daughters. And as we were just talking about, one is graduating college, one's a freshman in college, and I think you have a high schooler as well.
Yep.
Tell us about your family. Tell what it was like raising your 3 daughters, and tell us about each one of them individually.
Sure. So, yeah, three daughters. My oldest name is Anne. She's graduating from UGA this semester. She's graduating with a degree in entertainment and media studies. So if any of your dozens of listeners out there have any connections for as a screenwriting or staff writing, that would certainly that's what she's hoping to get into.
We're pretty big in California.
Are you? Good.
Yeah.
And New York. Right. So that's her hope, and we'll see what that leads to. Isabel, my middle daughter, is a freshman at UGA. She is studying German and history. She hopes to one day become I think this changes a lot, but I think it's still to be a curator at a museum, to have her own museum, preferably in Germany, and so that we'll see if that how that plays out. But yeah, she loves German history and the German culture, and so that's something that she's passionate about. So hopefully she'll be able to do that. And then Catherine, my youngest, is in 10th grade in high school, and she wants to hopefully go to medical school or do something in the medical field when she graduates from college. And they're all, I'm lucky. They're all very good sisters. I grew up with a brother, so I only know in pairs. I've experienced with 3. When there are 2 of them together, they get along great. When there's the third, someone gets left out, right? Some alliance forms, and it's not horrible, but you just know it's there. They all get along very well, but it's still that dynamic of when there's a third, someone's left out. So, how many kids do you have, Paul?
I have 3, and you're absolutely right. Alliances are formed immediately when the 3 of them are in the same room or same location.
And they shift, as what I find. It's not always the same one getting excluded. So
let's just say it shifts occasionally, but there's pretty much the same alliance for most of their interactions.
You have 1 boy, 2 girls?
Oldest is a boy, and then 2 daughters. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wonder if that is the difference.
That and my middle kid has a really strong personality.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, I'm the third of 4. The oldest is a girl, my big sister, and then it's 3 boys, and I'm the middle of the boys, and so there was always the princess effect. She was the princess.
Sure.
The boys were the boys, and then between us, it was, I think my big brother and my little brother actually were better friends than I was with either of them. But like you said, things shift, so now I was better friends with my sister, I think, back in the day. And now we're all trying to be better siblings to each other in general, but we're all spread out across the country. So it's tough sometimes.
Yeah, it's hard. And that's, and I tell them, it's hard. I mean, it's hard to maintain relationships. It's very easy to damage them. And you're eventually going to get older, and you're going to, you would regret not having that relationship, I think. So I try to stress that with them. And
yeah, it's the longest running friendship that you'll ever have is your siblings.
That's right.
It sounds like you're a really wise and good dad these days, William. Was it like that at the birth of your first child?
No, I think it's on the job training, right? You learn as you go. Yeah. So when we were in the hospital and they were literally about to deliver Anne, uh, the doctor's there and I'm there, and literally it's about to happen, and the doctor drops one of the instruments on the floor, and I'm a conscientious Southern gentleman who sees that this has happened, so I casually reach down and grab the instrument and I put it back on the little table. And I think, what a hero am I? Here I am in all this chaos. I'm helping this doctor, and she looks at me with this look like, you moron, and she goes, that was sterile. and a nurse immediately comes and takes all of that away and replaces everything on that table. So I my wife and I laughed about that for quite a while. So it's little things like that as you're going along where you realize, I don't know what I'm doing, and you learn, and then you realize, I think your parents didn't know what they were doing. Even though when you're a kid and you're looking at them, you think, oh, they they're wise people. They know what to do. They know what advice to give, and you realize they're making it up because you made it up.
Yeah, no doubt. Are you the oldest of your two?
I am. I'm the older brother.
Yeah, I'm an older brother to a younger sister, and I describe myself, along with every other first child, as the experimental kid.
That's right. Yeah, and I see that in our family. My youngest daughter, I don't know if you guys have ever seen the show The Good Place, but the premise is they're in the good place, and you can't curse in the good place. So Kristen Bell, uses the word fork and shirt balls and stuff like that. So my youngest daughter, who's 16, does uses those terms, and so it always outrages her sisters. They're like, we couldn't even say gosh when we were her age, and here you're letting her say fork balls, and we're like, what do you want from us? We're tired. Give us alone.
Yeah, every time my son chooses the wrong path or makes an obvious mistake that the whole family learns about, he'll look at my daughter, say, "You're welcome."
Exactly.
Smart kid.
Yeah.
Good time. Cool. William, we had a really good time talking to you tonight. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to this episode coming out.
Yeah, thanks, William.
As do I. Thanks for having me, guys. Take care.
If you enjoyed this episode, come find us on Facebook or Instagram and let us know what you think. We'd love to connect. Thanks for listening.